When we think about the Roman Empire, right, we usually picture it collapsing in the 5th century, overrun by invaders, plunging Europe into the Dark Ages. But here is one of history's absolute greatest plot twists. The Roman Empire didn't actually fall. Well, not completely. The eastern half, ruling from Constantinople, managed to survive and adapt for an entire millennium after the West collapsed, 1,000 years. Today, we're unpacking the absolute powerhouse that made this impossible survival a reality, the Byzantine war machine.
So you really have to ask yourself, how on earth did the Roman Empire survive an extra 1,000 years? I mean, they were facing constant invasions from literally all sides. The secret wasn't just massive walls, although, to be fair, Constantinople had some incredible ones. The real answer is a gritty, highly adaptable, and wildly multi-ethnic military machine, a force that kept the empire alive through sheer, brutal discipline and some seriously terrifying innovation.
Let's set the stage here. The Byzantine army wasn't just some disorganized medieval militia that a local lord scraped together. Not at all. It was the direct professional continuation of the Eastern Roman military. They built on late Hellenistic legacies and evolved into one of the most effective and disciplined forces of the entire Middle Ages. We're talking about a highly organized continuation of classical Roman might.
At the heart of this were the tagmata, the professional standing army regiments, and they were incredibly specialized. You've got the Scolae, the senior regiment whose roots go all the way back to Constantine the Great. Then there's the Excubitores, this elite sentinel corps established back in the 5th century. You also have the Vigla, who handled critical logistics and palace security, and the Hicanatori, added later in 810 to really bolster those professional numbers. Every single unit had a specific, vital function, reporting directly to the emperor.
Section 1. Strategy and Military Manuals. The brains behind the brawn.
You see, Byzantine survival relied just as much on extreme tactical intelligence as it did on raw muscle. They studied warfare like a science. Take the 10th century Siligae Tacticorum, for example. This was a comprehensive military manual compiled right in Constantinople, and it is meticulously detailed. It didn't just give vague advice, it laid out precise rules for battle formations, ambushes, even espionage. It details this brilliant, hollow square infantry formation. Plus, it's the very first text to record specialized heavy cavalry, called the cataphracti, and specialized infantry, the men of Latoy, whose whole job was to shatter enemy cavalry charges. These weren't just defensive tactics. These innovations let the Byzantines aggressively push deep into enemy territory.
Section 2. Greek fire, medieval superweapon, the devastating technology.
But hey, strategy is only half the battle, right? Imagine being an enemy fleet facing their terrifying naval technology. Listen to this 11th century first-hand account from a Viking named Ingvar the Far-Traveled. He says, "A brass tube and from it flew much fire against one ship, and it burned up in a short time so that all of it became white ashes." The psychological terror here is just unmatched. It wasn't just fire, it was sudden, inescapable annihilation.
What makes Greek fire so fascinating is that it was a fiercely guarded state secret. It was this highly flammable mixture they'd shoot through bronze tubes, usually mounted on the front of their ships. And the craziest part, it could literally burn on top of water. Whether it was the Kievan Rus in 941 or Pisan raiders during the Crusades, this stuff reduced enemy fleets to absolute ashes. And get this, to this very day, the exact chemical recipe remains a total mystery.
Section 3. The fearsome Varangian Guard, the elite vanguard. Weapons, though, are only as good as the soldiers wielding them. The Byzantines relied heavily on native provincial levies, known as the thamata. These were guys who held land in exchange for military service. Great for defense, sure, but their main tactic was shadowing enemies and avoiding pitched battles. But then you have the legendary Varangian Guard. We're talking elite, axe-wielding Scandinavian and later Anglo-Saxon mercenaries. Fiercely loyal, heavily armored shock troops whose sole purpose was aggressive offensive combat. The Byzantines figured out how to brilliantly synthesize the defensive caution of their native troops with the terrifying, overwhelming power of these foreign mercenaries. So let's jump to the year 988. Emperor Basil II is facing a massive empire-threatening internal rebellion. In total desperation, he reaches out to Prince Vladimir of Kiev. Vladimir's response? He sends Basil exactly 6,000 heavily armed Rus warriors. 6,000? This massive influx of manpower, bought with gold and a royal marriage, officially cemented the Varangian Guard and literally changed Byzantine military history forever. The genius of using foreigners was that they had absolutely zero ties to local Byzantine politics or scheming aristocratic families. This made them uniquely perfect for their jobs. They served as the highest-paid personal bodyguards to the emperor. In battle, they were heavy infantry shock troops, using massive axes to just break enemy lines wide open. Off the battlefield, though, that outsider status meant they were entrusted with tasks native troops would probably refuse: guarding high-profile prisoners, executing unsavory jobs like torturing rebels or blinding deposed rulers. In exchange for this unquestioning loyalty, they got incredible privileges, including the right to judge their own ranks.
Section 4. Manzikert and the Restoration, Crisis and Comeback. Now, no military machine runs flawlessly forever, and the empire eventually hit a wall of extreme crisis. It's a textbook example of how bad political decisions can cause a catastrophic cascade of failure. In 1053, a militarily incompetent emperor, Constantine IX, makes a disastrous choice to save some money. He disbands the 50,000-man Iberian army. I mean, what a mistake. By 1064, Seljuk Turks exploit those newly weakened borders and capture Ani. Then, in 1071, the absolute nightmare scenario happens. The Byzantine army suffers a crushing, catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Manzikert. The emperor is literally captured, and they lose the strategic heartland of Anatolia. It really looked like the end of the road. But then, in 1081, Alexios I Komnenos takes power and immediately gets to work rebuilding the professional army from absolute scratch.
And the sheer scale of this comeback, what historians call the Komnenian Restoration, is just staggering. Look at this growth. Alexios I somehow managed to scrape together a professional force of 20,000 men by 1097. His successor, John II, bumped that up to 30,000, and by the time Manuel I was reigning around 1180, the field army was back to a massive 40,000 troops. Over 3 generations, these emperors completely rebuilt a professional, native mercenary hybrid army that essentially turned Byzantium back into a global superpower.
Section 5. Legacy of Byzantine Might, the Fall of Rome's Shield. But as we know, all empires eventually face their twilight, and those final centuries were pretty tragic. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade shockingly sacked Constantinople, which was a blow the empire honestly never recovered from. And while they did manage to take their capital back decades later, the military was a shadow of its former self. The once terrifying Varangian Guard, who used to shatter enemy lines, suffered this poignant decline into just ceremonial palace guards. Finally, in 1453, facing impossible odds and massive new Ottoman cannons, the 1,000-year shield of Rome shattered for good.
So, looking back at all of this, from the chemical devastation of Greek fire to the unbreakable loyalty of the Varangian Guard, I want to leave you with something to really think about. Is an empire's survival ultimately determined by the brilliance of its military technology, or is it the absolute loyalty of the soldiers wielding it? Let that sink in, and thank you for joining me to explore this incredible piece of history today.